So, but a value metric that as a way that the customer thinks about it.
Yeah.
So you have to make sure that you're counting what they count. Oracle did a licensing project in, I want to say about 2008 or 2009. It's one of the smartest things I'd ever seen. They were trying to sell a big expensive stack of software to a city in the Netherlands. And the city in the Netherlands said, we're never going to buy this. It's just too expensive. And so they said, what if we charge you so much per citizen per year?
Is it the same price though?
Because yes, it ultimately came out to the same price. But the municipality thought about everything in terms of citizens, right? That's their tax base, that's their service base, that's how many hospitals they have, it's how many school children they have, it's all. And so for them, you were suddenly counting the way they were counting.
Is this thing on?
Yesterday's price is not today's price.
You know what we do on the show? We bring experts. Only the hits, baby. What you're about to hear is an interview that I just did with Mr. Jason Kap, the founder and CEO of Blue Rocket. So Jason's a pricing and packaging expert. A lot of people out there have been asking me to bring another pricing expert on the show. Jason is a two-time, what do I call it, participant? Guest of the Run the Numbers podcast. And we do a deep dive on the evolution of software pricing and packaging. Woo! We go through the different waves back all the way to software's inception, where you would actually buy hardware with software on it and you could program it, but didn't really do much, to the era where you could buy software for your hardware, to the era where there were application service providers, to the era where there was outsourced infrastructure, which eventually led to this thing called SaaS. Then we go through the usage-based revolution that's occurred. I don't know if you want to say it's still going on. I think it's still going on. To the hybrid-based models that many employ today. And then we do a little bit of crystal ball. Will it all swing back to the consumer? Will there be more or less shelfware? How should CFOs think about pricing and packaging when it comes to this new AI era? Transparency and value abstraction are both something that is top of mind when it comes to pricing and packaging. When AI is out there, how do you link a value metric to something? Should it be based on seats? How do you deal with overages? This is a wealth of knowledge in just 1 hour with tactical advice from Jason of Blue Rocket. All this and much, much more after a short word from our sponsors. Ready to plan confidently, close faster, and report more accurately? Here's what sets Planful apart. Imagine purpose-built applications for every department, from FP&A to accounting, marketing to HR, all with built-in financial intelligence. It's easy to implement Planful in just weeks and with minimal IT involvement, so you can rapidly and seamlessly engage everyone across the business on your key financial progress. Best of all, Planful grows with you. Its unparalleled scalability ensures that no matter how fast your business expands, Planful can keep up. See why over 1,500 customers worldwide choose Planful as their flexible, user-friendly, end-to-end financial performance management platform. Oh yeah! Go to planful.com/metrics to see how you can reach peak financial performance with Planful. That's planful.com/metrics. Mercury knows your financial operations are complex. Founders and finance teams have to pull together different tools, reconcile transactions from different sources, and struggle to get accurate answers. With Mercury, you can simplify your operations with banking and software that power your critical financial workflows, all within the one thing every business needs, a bank account. And with new bill pay and accounting capabilities, you can pay bills faster, stay in control of company spend, and speed up reconciliation. Apply in minutes at Mercury.com and join over 200,000, ambitious startups that trust Mercury to provide the precision, control, and focus they need to transform their financial workflows so they can perform at their best. Mercury, the art of simplified finances. Mercury is a financial technology company, not a bank. Banking services provided by Choice Financial Group and Evolve Bank and Trust. Members FDIC. I'm getting good at that voice. All right, folks, this is perhaps the most excited and caffeinated I've ever been for an episode of Run the Numbers. What we're about to embark on is a deep dive on the evolution of software, pricing, and packaging. And I really can't think of anyone better suited to lead us on this journey than Mr. Jason Kap, a pricing expert in his own right at Blue Rocket and a long-tenured Microsoft leader. Thanks for joining me, Jason.
Thanks for inviting me.
You're going to be kind of our pricing guru here, leading us on this journey. I'm going to be the guy who peppers comments from the sidelines and asks the stupid questions. So if I ask anything that's completely silly, just look at me and shake your head.
It's all good.
Jason, I want to start at the beginning when software first came about here. And so I'm going to call this wave one. And if I have it right, based on my extensive YouTube and Wikipedia searching, hardware and software were sold together. Is that correct?
Yeah, in the early days, absolutely. The software had to be for your specific model, not even just your maker. So it came with the hardware.
And how long did this era last? Was this a while?
Oh, a good long while. So it started in computing started sort of being commercialized in the 1950s. And I think the actual delivery of software with hardware ended in 1969. There was a case against IBM that actually made it so that it could no longer be bundled. Even so, for decades afterwards, and even today, there are pieces of software that come with your hardware. So that hasn't changed, but it's no longer the main way that software is sold.
So the software would come installed on the hardware. Would that software be, I don't know, would it allow you to do a lot of things, or did you have to do your own building with it?
So remember that computing in those days was delivered in semi-trucks. So it had to be installed on site, and it could only be installed by whoever you bought it from, which is why you had software salesmen there were hardware salesmen. They made lots and lots of money because they made very few sales, but each sale was worth quite a lot of money. And there were some programs that allowed you to do specific things, but most of the software actually just allowed you to build software on your computer to do whatever you needed to do. So it was really more about making it programmable than making it do something useful.
So the software allowed you to build your own software. Okay, it's kind of like a choose your own adventure there.
It is absolutely choose your own adventure. And if you've ever actually seen the movie Hidden Figures, there's actually the ladies, that's exactly what they're doing, is they're learning how to program the IBM computer that's delivered there. They're not actually, and that's later, right? That's later in the 60s. So
it's so funny you bring up that example, because I almost said that when you started saying that it was delivered on semi trucks, because I'm imagining those women in those rooms, if for people who have seen the movies, and the computers are like 6 feet tall. The hardware is huge. It takes the whole room.
It's enormous. Yeah. And it didn't do very much. I mean, it did a tremendous amount for its day, but compared to today, your cell phone is way more powerful than any of those computers ever were.
And you said that there are still some vendors in this era or wave today. Would that be like stuff for like the military or GPS services? Well, why would someone still be in this era?
So as we go through the various waves of software and the way that, our interest is in pricing it, how was it priced and why? But as we go through the waves, you'll actually see that there's always a segment that's left behind. So there are, and I'm not a technologist, but there are examples of this today. There's the Raspberry Pi, which is a little programmable device that you can buy. And what comes with it is the ability to program it. It doesn't do other things. There's front programmable gate arrays, which are ways that customers can actually buy software that does and program it to do very specific things. We had a client who actually was really into those. So there are still pieces of hardware that's exactly how it's sold, and the software that comes with it is only to program it.
Got it. And the next evolution was you could actually buy software for your hardware. Do I have that right?
That's right. So in wave one, the thing that we were counting, so as we go through today, we should talk about what is the metric, what is the thing that we're trying to count or we're pricing. So in wave one, what we're actually counting is the hardware. That's the primary. In fact, the lawsuit against IBM was because the software was being made free and other people wanted to be able to sell software to some of the folks who were buying the IBM hardware, and they couldn't because they'd just get it free. And there was also a software sharing club, which is where Shelfware comes from. The club was actually called Share. And so that's wave one. Wave two, this is where you start buying software for your hardware. This is from sort of, let's call it the 60s to you can actually still buy it today. But this was the wave that Microsoft rode. The Microsoft really created was the ability to buy software that actually can go on other people's hardware and eventually on most people's hardware when we get the IBM spec. The IBM spec is released later, and that actually makes it so there are lots and lots of independent software providers, ISPs as they're called, who actually program all kinds of things. And it works as well on the one I bought as the one that you bought, CJ, instead of being really specific to a model from a vendor.
And how did the pricing work for this wave?
So the pricing for this wave, we used to call it full package product or FPP. And literally for every unit that you bought, you got a box. And some of these boxes were actually in the box, there was a way to install it, originally a floppy disk, later a CD. Those were pretty revolutionary. So you had the term shelfware comes from you had all these boxes in a closet on a shelf. And when you distributed them, oftentimes the way that companies manage it is when I said, hey, CJ, here's a piece of, if I was the IT department, here's a piece of software that you can use in your job, I would bring you the box. And that way we actually knew that you were the one who was licensed for it, and I wasn't giving it also to someone else. And they had product keys that would actually unlock them one at a time. But so they were sold that way. And over time, customers began to get, as they bought more and more PCs and they bought more and more software, they began to be frustrated by the fact that they had to receive a box for all these things. And so at Microsoft, at least, they moved to a certificate of authenticity, which was a piece of paper, and it looked like a bearer bond, and it had a serial number on it, and it had a seal, and at one point they had holograms. You could look and see like the whatever. I don't remember what the hologram was, but you could see the bird or whatever when you turned it one way. And so we would deliver. Initially, we had delivered prior to my time. We had delivered pallets of these boxes of software to customers, and they said, "Please don't do that anymore." So now we started sending them pallets of these pieces of paper, so that for every one that they had a piece of paper in a closet somewhere, carefully tended to, like the money that it was.
Why was it being shipped? I mean, this is just one of those things in history that you look back on it and you're like, that's kind of silly in retrospect. Was it being shipped in the boxes because they didn't know how to track who was using it? Or is it because it was originally hardware salesmen who were used to shipping like a box of hardware?
In software today, we still actually often refer to the thing that we're selling as a SKU, which is a stock keeping unit. It comes from the physical world because we used to sell boxes of this stuff. And so it was because customers expected to receive something, and this was the thing that they could hold on to. They also tracked it as assets, and it's much easier to track a physical asset than an ephemeral one.
I have to admit that it is. As a CFO who has to track all our assets, it is easier if there's a thing you can touch.
So you would go to the big room where all these things are stacked, and that's where you'd find them. So, but this actually also got annoying to customers. And at one point, Steve Ballmer, who was the head of sales at Microsoft, he was with a client, and a customer said, don't send me any more of these. Thanks for going from the boxes to the papers. Don't send me any more of either of those, because it's very hard to count. There's so many of them, and I'm a large corporation. I'm across many sites. It's very hard for me to keep track of them. And he and Steve had a conversation, and Steve said, "So what is it that you can count?" And he said, "Well, I know exactly how many PCs I have because they're so blooming expensive, and we amortize them over time, right? So we actually know exactly how many of those we have." And so this is where Microsoft came up with what became the most successful licensing agreement on earth, which is the enterprise agreement. Was basically just, okay, you tell me how many of those PCs you have, and then we will actually charge you for each one of those, and we won't ship you anything. You'll just get one document. And a lot of innovations actually happened over time around the enterprise agreement, which we can maybe talk about in a second. But that was really the innovation, is counting. Everybody still needs to count something. And so if in the hardware phase, the metric is the hardware, in this phase, the metric was originally the box, then the paper, and then it was a proxy. And the proxy most often used was the number of PCs. Occasionally, the proxy was the number of employees you had, but we still didn't have a one-to-one relationship between employees and PCs in those days. And for certain kinds of organizations like United Parcel Service, you still don't. There's no reason for some sorting folks in the warehouse and the drivers to have a full-time PC. This is where computing actually is expanding beyond knowledge workers, or the definition of knowledge worker is expanding beyond the accountants and the people who write press releases to be appropriately folks like in the warehouse and in the trucks. So, but they use stations, right? And so you had to start figuring out, okay, how do I actually charge for those people? Because there's no way I'm going to charge my customer, or the customer saying, the CFO saying, there's no way I'm paying the same amount for the driver who checks his email in those days once a day to the guy who sits in front of a computer all day long.
Wow. That's such an amazing sequence of events there. And to go back to what was in the box, were they sending CD-ROMs out, or were they sending floppy disks?
Floppy disks, CD-ROMs. There was also a manual, a physical manual, a booklet. Oftentimes, there was maybe a quick start guide that you could fold out. It was very colorful and would fold out and would help you install your software because you actually needed to install your software, and you might need to configure it in some way. And it would say, if you have a network and if you don't have a network, these are the ways to install it. That went away fairly early, but yeah.
We're still in the perpetual license era. I just want to flag for people. So you would buy this once and you'd have it forever?
Right. And so we actually, in the business, the term of it's FPP if it's physical, but whether it's physical or not, we actually refer to this as on-premise software.
Okay.
So on-prem, it goes to the customer, and whatever the customer does with it, they do. We don't do it for them. We don't have knowledge of it. It's on their servers. It's on their desktops, and they do almost always, probably without exception, have it as in a perpetual way. And the metric, as I said, is you're counting something physical.
Yeah, you have to count something, and we'll get to it later in the show. But eventually, you get to the per seat model as well within SaaS. So we're not there yet, but we're on our way. Hey, thanks for listening. We'll be right back after a word from our sponsors. What does the future hold for business? Can someone invent a crystal ball? Until then, over 38,000 businesses, wow, that's a lot of companies, have future-proofed their business with NetSuite by Oracle, the #1 cloud ERP, bringing accounting, financial management, inventory, and HR into one platform. With real-time insights and forecasting, you're able to peer into the future and seize new opportunities. Download the CFO's Guide to AI and Machine Learning for free at netsuite.com/metrics. That's netsuite.com/metrics. METRICS, metrics. Please, guys, I really need this. Cash is king. As the CFO of a SaaS company, I know firsthand how important it is to maintain a healthy AR balance. If you can't effectively manage cash, you can't service debt, make payroll, or invest in growing your business. That's why I'm so excited to partner with the sponsor of today's episode, Maxio, the leading billing and financial operations platform for B2B SaaS. Maxio helps top SaaS companies like Chili Piper, Crunchbase, and Stack Overflow get cash in the door faster by automating collections and dunning. Gone are the days of manually chasing down invoices. Join the 2,500 plus subscription businesses using Maxio, formerly SaaS Optics and Chargeify, to eliminate revenue leakage and streamline order to cash. It's never been easier to get paid. Visit maxio.com/run the numbers to supercharge your financial operations in 2024. Not only does requesting a demo using the Run the Numbers link help support this podcast, ya boy, you also receive a 10% discount on your first year with Maxio. Woo! That's maxio.com/run the numbers. That's maxio.com/run the numbers. Okay, serious question for all my accounting pros here today. Are you doing what you were hired to do? What I mean is, do you have time to actually be a business partner, or are you buried in tedious manual tasks just to get your journal entries prepared every month? I know how that feels. Leapfin's here to help with that. Leapfin is accounting automation software that automatically prepares and posts reliable journal entries. And that's just the beginning. High-growth businesses like Reddit, Canva, and SeatGeek choose Leapfin to eliminate manual tasks, accelerate month-end close, and enable accounting leaders like you to provide faster insights that will help your company grow. If you're battling messy transaction data from Stripe, Adyen, Shopify, Apple Pay, and other PSPs, and then battling again to get it all into NetSuite, go to leapfin.com to watch their short product intro video. And if you like what you see, request a 15-minute conversation to learn how accounting automation can help you and your team. Check out leapfin.com today. That's leap like jump, fin like shark. I just made that up. I hope they're okay with it. Leapfin.com. So after this, there's a third wave. I don't think it's as long though. What was that third wave?
So people began to question whether or not maintaining their own servers was the best way to go about business. And so they have application service providers, ASPs they were called. They had their heyday it came to prominence in the middle of the 1990s, maybe 1994, 1995. And they were gone by 2000, 2001, largely. There are still a few of them out in the world. Rackspace, I think, still does some application service provider. There are some, so they serve a niche. But what we're trying to do here is we're saying I need to worry less about the server side or the actual application, deploying the application. Remember, you had to do patches manually. They weren't nearly as automated as they are today. I don't want to worry about that. I just want to make sure that when CJ comes to work, he can actually open up Excel and enjoy all the glorious goodness that is Excel. And so there was a one-to-one mapping between the customer and the server. So it was not a service, it was a server somewhere or servers somewhere that lined up with your client. There were several problems with it for both the application service provider and the vendor and the user. One of them was, remember, we're still using pretty unstable internet technology in these days.
Right.
So there's a lot of downtime. There's downtime on the head end servers, on the ASP that's actually trying to serve. There's downtime for my client. I can't get on. There's low bandwidth actually in between. So that doesn't work very well. Economics didn't really work. They couldn't charge enough to the customer to make it worth the customer taking the servers out of their own place, and they still needed some servers. There was licensing restrictions. So one of the ways that ASPs began to think about the world is, can I do multiplexing? So multiplexing is a technology, and I don't mean that. So for everyone who's a technologist who's listening and saying, what do you mean? Multiplexing in this case is, I'm going to let CJ use it for a little while, and then I'm going to let Jason use it I'm going to buy one copy, and I'm going to actually let multiple people or eventually multiple organizations use the same copy. And that's not how it was priced by the vendors. So the vendors began to assert restrictions in their licensing that actually made that not possible. And ultimately, the ASPs, there were a couple of them. I think the biggest one was USI. Some of them went bankrupt or they got acquired. I mean, they left. But remember, also about that same time as the .com burst, the bubble burst in 2001. The end of the ASPs and the end of the bubble are kind of all at once, where we had learned a lot about the internet, and we had learned that we didn't know nearly as much about internet economics as we thought we knew.
For this ASP wave, I can't decide if it was just before its time where, the internet, like you said, wasn't stable enough, or if it was truly like a fundamental unit economics problem where you can't really, sell 10 contracts to 10 customers. You buy one contract and serve it back to 10 customers. Like if that isn't going to work no matter where you are.
Yeah, I think it was just too early. I think the idea was the right idea that maybe customers aren't great at servers. They don't need to be great at servers, and I can be great at servers, and you don't have to worry about that. But we didn't have everything that was necessary, particularly the internet itself, and the technology of how to manage it on the back end.
And so, how was this wave priced and packaged to an end consumer? If I was engaging with an ASP.
They tried all kinds of models. One of the primary models was you bought the number of servers. So if I was the customer, Jason Kap Incorporated, and CJ was my ASP, I would buy the number of servers that I wanted to serve me, and I always estimated too low because I was trying to save money. And so that was one way we did it. Then we switched the model to be per user. Per user actually was more appropriate for the load that I was causing at your organization. But remember, I have a dedicated server, at least in the beginning. But then the economics didn't work out for me because if I'm going to do that, I might as well have my own servers and manage it internally or my own desktops. So the licensing model was mixed and the economics were mixed. The technology was mixed. I think the whole thing.
It's funny because it feels like we're oscillating towards like just making it better overall, and you can kind of almost handpick certain elements from each of these waves. And what I'm getting a sense of is this infrastructure as a service was like an idea, and we can get to it later, but like it actually did work out for the companies like an AWS later on.
Yeah. So that time period. So what Amazon has done is so this is the close of 2000, 2001. So Amazon actually has figured out a great way to actually do they've kind of done a multi-tenant architecture. They've figured out a way to share their servers and the load between their servers. They've spent a lot of time on their technology for their e-commerce business. And in 2006, they actually decide they can rent that infrastructure out to other people. So they actually launch elastic computing, which is the ability to rent a computer that they have. They do, I think they did S3 at the time, which would actually be storage. Mm-hmm. So they actually introduced this idea, and the internet has also advanced in this time period, but mostly their back-end infrastructure advanced. So they say, hey, we're not using this all the time. We have seasonal ups and downs. Is there a way that we can get other people to pay us to use the infrastructure that we're not using seasonally? And so they launched that. And by, I think it's 2009, they actually come out with their own version of SQL. It's called RDP. So they actually launched that. And by 2009, they started to get quite a stirring of customers. It wasn't wildly successful at first, but it was, they had picked the best parts of the ASP model, solved some of the technology problems, and they had actually gone at it again. And at the same time, as you're moving to that sort of outsourced infrastructure, you actually have, in 1999, you've got Salesforce that was actually born in the cloud. They looked more like the .com companies because they were pure SaaS, pure cloud, I should say. And so they had actually already thought to themselves, we're not going to actually build ourselves in the way that Oracle, which is where they came from. We're not going to build ourselves in the way that Oracle did. We're going to do it in this different way. But, they weren't wildly successful yet either by 2006. They certainly were making a stir, but not wildly successful. And then in 2006, you have this other thing coming forward is everyone's trying to figure out how to make the internet work. Google comes forward, and they come forward, I think also in 2006 with Google Apps. And so they say, hey, you know what? You actually don't need to buy. Their marketing line was, you don't actually need to buy that expensive, heavyweight Microsoft software, one for every user. We've got this free, lightweight stuff that you can actually deliver over the internet. And at first, it wasn't, it was what it was supposed to be. It was a kind of an MVP, but actually still introduced this model. They said I imagine they looked at Salesforce and said, born in the cloud seems smart. And so about the same time that Amazon thought, let's rent out our infrastructure, they said, hey, let's see if we can also rent out our infrastructure, because we have a lot of infrastructure from our web service, our search service. We have all these places. So, and the metric actually here is AWS is selling it. They're not selling you a server, they're selling you compute. So they're actually abstracting the server, physical server, up to a different unit and saying, hey, we can sell them a megabyte of storage. We can sell them a MIP, a computer MIP, or some version of that. We can tell them we can emulate a server. They have it later like size, but it's not a specific server. And then Salesforce is saying we can actually just license each individual user, and Google followed that. So we begin to see what we actually now know as the sort of modern computing world, with other people worry about the back end, and I only worry about the front end.
So it took us plus 50 years, but I think we've made it to where a lot of companies find themselves today. So the first wave, which was hardware and then software that allowed you to program your first software, that was 30 plus years. Yep. We were kind of working in that era. Then wave two, just to recap, buy software for your hardware. That was 20 plus years with the independent software providers, the shareware clubs. Then you get to wave three with the ASPs, the application service providers. That didn't last as long. That was maybe only 5 years. And now we find ourselves in this fourth wave, Jason, outsourced infrastructure and software as a service. And what I like that you flagged for listeners is that some of these companies were born in the cloud, like a Salesforce, and others made, that leap of faith to change their pricing and packaging.
Yes. And so I would say 2009 is where there is strong evidence that this is the direction that the industry needs to go. So 2009, certainly at Microsoft, we were having those conversations. We were looking at Amazon. We were looking at Salesforce. We were looking at Google Apps. We were beginning to hear from our enterprise clients that was actually really important to them. I remember a very large client of Microsoft came to us in, I want to say, 2007 or 8. So Amazon, they were an international client. Amazon wasn't anywhere near their radar. And they said, I don't ever want to manage my Exchange servers, which are email servers. I don't want to ever manage those again. And Steve Ballmer actually, who I don't know if he was the CEO yet, but he said he made him a deal on the spot. We'll happily manage those for you. And I remember he came back to Microsoft, and Microsoft basically said, we don't have a good way of doing that. We can manage our servers for ourselves, and we can sell people servers. But we don't have a good way to manage other people's servers. So that was actually, this undercurrent of everyone moving towards, is there a way to get there? So we get to, there are still some folks out there, still application service providers of the world. There's still software vendors, particularly industrial software that sell you a perpetual on-prem license. Happy to do that. But now most people are beginning to think SaaS is the way to go. So by 2009 is really the moment where everybody's like, we got to do something about this. And so Microsoft internally starts looking at our experiments in SaaS. We called them online services at the time. And we had been working with those for many years. We had Encarta, which had been, kind of missed the wave where multimedia CDs, but we had multimedia CD, an encyclopedia, like Encyclopedia Britannica, these multiple. So that was actually published in multimedia, and we began hosting that online. We had a geographic information service that was online. We had a few things that we were serving online. And so we began to understand how to model customer behavior. So how often do they use things? How much are they willing to pay for it? And that's when the company said, all right, we're going to take Office and we're going to put it into the cloud. We're going to take some of our server infrastructure, 2 or 3 parts of our server infrastructure. We're going to put that into the cloud. And we're also going to actually help people manage their PCs. And so we're going to do that with something called Intune. We're going to put that into the cloud. And so this started a multi-year effort on the company to develop all those technologies, or to convert the technologies to be able to do that well. And on the business side, to figure out, how do you move a beautiful on-prem perpetual business, which is making a ton of money and customers are very happy with, because they tell us they're happy with that licensing model. They're happy with the tech, they're happy with the licensing model. How do you take that and how do you move it into the cloud? And how do you not lose any revenue while you're doing it? You can lose margin because we knew that cloud computing, we didn't have the cost model figured out for cloud computing, but we did know what we could charge. And so you've got, so Microsoft begins around this time to start to talk to customers. And eventually we do launch it. Microsoft, I think it was called Microsoft Online Business Services or something like that originally, but it basically became, when it was finally truly launched, it was Office 365, Azure, and Intune. And we began to talk to customers about being hybrid. Now, hybrid in this case actually means some of it was hosted by us, some of it was hosted by you. So CJ, you might actually say, hey, I've got critical infrastructure, I'm a hospital. I need these record systems to be available 100% of the time. I've spent a lot of money on my data centers. I'm going to keep that on-prem. But my billing system, that's not mission critical for me. I could actually put that in your cloud, so I spend less money on it, because I also do it episodically. I only run billing maybe once a week, which is true. They did a lot of batch services. So I don't actually need that infrastructure all the time, and I could buy that by the drink. We in those days talked about buying it by the drink.
I've never heard that. That's good.
I can buy that by the drink, and that's actually cheaper for me than bottle service. So
bottle service.
So that's how folks did it. And Microsoft, by allowing customers, and also we'd say, well, maybe for your headquarters, you actually want to keep your on-prem Office licenses, but for your field sales offices in Norway and in South Africa and in Korea and in wherever far distant from your headquarters is, maybe you want to go Office 365 and you want to have us host it, because then you don't have to maintain server infrastructure outside of your main campus or your main campuses. So Microsoft was very much allow customers to move. And we also learned, I'm talking a lot, but we learned a lot of lessons. Customers, for instance, said to us, I don't want to pay extra. And so in order to do that, I want to make sure that you tell me, this was on the Azure side, I need you to tell me every single thing that happens. I want a report of every day, how many MIPS, how many megabytes, how many squirrels, how many whatever they were counting. I need to see that detailed bill every single month, and I'm going to pay exactly that bill. So we did. We sent it to them. And it could not have been very long, maybe 6 months. Customers were screaming, please don't ever do that to me again.
You've buried me in paperwork.
Do you have any idea how much data you are sending me? There's no way for me to sort through this. This is meaningless. And the other thing that they were experiencing were these tremendous waves it was really very uneven. And so we early on said, oh, okay, so we'll actually create ranges for you, so tiers. So if you if you do between this much and this much, we'll charge you one price, and then if you charge the next price or whatever, and we sort of settled that out. And I mention that now because when we talk about the next wave,
Yeah.
that we're going to get to, you'll actually notice that people actually wanted to go back to the early lesson we already learned. The customers didn't like it.
I'm glad you teed that up, so people stay tuned for that. I do want to quickly go back to the logos that made the shift. And so Salesforce was born in the cloud.
Yep.
They were kind of the guinea pig, but they didn't have anything to lose, right? Because they started there. Microsoft was probably the first to convert and have something really big to lose, and also have to do the economics on the back of the envelope. Concur, I think they went online in enterprise pretty early compared to others. Why is Adobe always thrown around as kind of the prime example of moving to SaaS?
So that's going to be 2013. So Microsoft is actually now fully out there with Office 365, Azure, and Intune. Customers really like the model. And Adobe, they realized that what they had been selling was perpetual versions of their software. And when you sell perpetual on-prem, you're actually a slave to the upgrade cycle. So you actually, when people get new hardware that's more capable, or when you create new features, people upgrade. And so every couple of years, you actually get this revenue boost. Microsoft had solved that by the enterprise agreement. We'd smoothed out the revenue boost. But essentially, that's what you're selling is upgrades. When customers began to look at what they were getting from Google, from Microsoft, and from Salesforce and from others, which was continuous innovation being placed in the cloud when they needed it, Adobe realized that hardware wasn't advancing as fast as they thought it was. I don't know if their innovation was advancing as quickly or not, but they had seen a fall off in customers buying their software. And so the path around that was they forced a change. They just said, they literally got up one day and said, we will no longer sell perpetual licenses to any of our customers for any of our, what they call creative cloud now, our creative cloud. You actually can only subscribe to it. And Microsoft had done it by invitation. And Salesforce had started there. So those weren't big for customers. That was gentle. For Adobe customers, it was a watershed moment, right? They just, you don't have a choice. You're going to move, or I guess you're not going to use Adobe anymore. Or you're going to use your old versions.
Right. And there was some friction, I heard, too, in that process with customers.
When I read histories about it, occasionally I will read a sympathetic version where customers like the continuous innovation. When I talk to customers, and when I talk to a friend of mine is the gentleman who actually led that move for Adobe, customers didn't like it. They didn't like it at all. That was not they had not been led down the path to be well prepared for that, and there was some serious pushback. But Adobe products were so good and so ubiquitous, they didn't really feel like they had a choice. And I think that's actually how it works. If your product is wildly good and there are really no good substitutes for it, you can make a big licensing change and you can get away with it. Your customers will be unhappy with you, but you can get away with it. If you're in a duopoly or an oligopoly, if there are meaningful alternatives to what you're doing, you can't get away with that kind of move.
Well, I'm glad you brought that up, because there is a why in the back of all of this, and innovation is part of it. You want to meet your customer where they want to purchase, but there's also a financial aspect to this as well, right?
Absolutely. Yeah. Adobe had seen falling sales, and they weren't sure about the upgrade cycle and how that was going to actually perform. If the rest of the world was living in the cloud or a cloud type cycle, how are they going to be treated? And I don't know this, but if I were their pricing guy at the time, I would also have been worried about how Wall Street was going to be thinking about me, since I was still upgrade cycle dependent and everyone else had kind of smooth revenues.
And investors really like the ARR look of all of this. It's probably better than average purchases per user per year, right?
I imagine. Yeah, I would hope so.
And I think a lot of VCs and private equity firms were reinforcing that push. I mean, I was at a backup and recovery company for 3 years, and we underwent the transition from perpetual license. A lot of it was on-prem. Some of it was in the cloud. And with these huge maintenance contracts, which were amazing margin, you can imagine.
Yep.
But we had to undergo this transition to SaaS. And there is that moment where you take that leap of faith, like you're jumping off without a safety net from one cliff to the other. And you're like, I'm kind of shutting off a cash machine, or at least delaying the gratification from it for a while.
Yeah, that's exactly right. And so that was actually the big problem for Microsoft, right? Big problem for Microsoft was that we had, with the enterprise agreement in the enterprise space, I mean, we sold, we had something called Select, which was once a year, and we had Open, which was first. So we had some variability, but essentially the bulk of the business, $36 billion a year, right? That was actually these 3-year contracts, which were all at maintenance, and they were very, very smooth and steady. So, and Microsoft, the way that they did the accounting too, is Microsoft always had a bunch of unearned revenue. So with the numbers, Wall Street always knew that Microsoft's numbers were way better than what they were actually saying, because the rest of it was already baked in. And so that's what others were trying to create, is essentially it's ARR. And so now they're trying to figure out, how do I get ARR with this move?
Jason, you had said a dirty 9-letter word earlier. I think it was Shelfware. How does Shelfware play into this next wave that we're going to speak to?
So now everyone feels better about the fact that we don't have all this infrastructure. We don't have these big server rooms with the raised floors we need to maintain anymore. Our infrastructure is far more reliable because the internet's reliable and the vendors are very good at caring for their software. But then in the full package product day, when we sold extra copies, they were put on the shelf called Shelfware, right? And so you actually, in the SaaS model, you have that same thing. I bought too many. I either bought too many services from the same customer. I really only used the one cloud, but they sold me an extra cloud, or they actually have too many of my users using it. And when I do an analysis as a CFO, I realize that I have 80% of my users using it once a year and 20% of them using it 11 times a day. And so I want to shrink that, because it's essentially Shelfware. I want to shrink that down to a smaller amount. So we get CFOs beginning to really push on vendors to say, I need to buy a different way. And the phrase that I heard is, it's like electricity. I just plug into the internet and it works. And if I buy it like electricity, I want to actually pay for it like electricity, which is however many kilowatt hours I use, that's how many I want to pay for. And this is where the usage model, the next wave, actually begins to be introduced.
We spoke with John McCauley, the CFO of Calendly, which is product-led growth. And it's truly like you have to show up and earn it every day, or else you can cancel it. And before that, he said, listen, CJ, I came from a background where I worked at Seismic, which was an enterprise field sales motion, seat-based. And then I worked at ServiceNow in the early days, which was truly like an enterprise. Like you have to take a bet that I hope in 9 months I'll see the value from this. And he called it the Planet Fitness model. Like the dirty secret is that we make money when you don't show up.
Right. Because every user that actually is in the system is costing me time, right? It's costing me MIPS, it's costing me compute or electricity. So really for those vendors, they do make money when you don't show up. Yeah.
And so this leads us into that fourth wave, which is usage-based pricing. Where did this push come from again?
Came from finance. So finance was actually saying, hey, IT has grown to be one of my largest cost centers, but I no longer could walk around and point at those machines that used to cost so much money. Yeah. I can't walk to the floor that had all those developers or had all those IT people that were maintaining. So why am I spending so much money? And they began to analyze where that money was going, and it was going to per seat for these SaaS companies. So this is actually where usage comes from.
And like you said, if I'm consuming electricity, I wanna pay for it that way. But does it work for vendors? Because if I listen to earnings calls, especially Snowflake, they throw around this term called pricing optimization. Whenever you hear that as an investor, it's like, put your earmuffs on.
So it sort of works. So in a rising tide situation, usage is the best. The economy is growing. All of my customers are growing. I entice them with a low-priced offer to just put a few things in the cloud with me. And as they grow, I grow. They need more seats. They need more storage space. They need more databases. They need whatever. And so in a rising tide, it's awesome. But in a receding tide, which is kind of where we've been for a while, it's horrible because As they shrink, I shrink. And so that's the macroeconomic view. There's a smaller view, though, which is it kind of doesn't work for vendors or for customers. This was a swing towards customers to allow them to be usage-based model. And for vendors, the money became too episodic, too wavy. So people were using more, they were using less. It was hard to keep my staff. It was hard to make investments in the roadmap because I didn't know how much money I was going to get. So it was too uneven. And for customers, it didn't always work either because they thought they knew what they were signing up for, but these were uncapped. And it's a little bit like I have a friend who bought a house.
Yeah.
He bought this new house. And when he got there, well, let's back up. Here in Western Washington, Seattle area, water is fairly cheap for the first so many gallons per house. And then it's not very cheap for the next so many gallons per house. And then it is wildly expensive over a certain amount. We feel like we have a lot of water. It's very green. We have lots of lakes, but we actually manage it by price, which is a great way to manage everything. And so if you want to be a big user of water, you're going to pay a lot of money. So we moved into this house, and it turns out that somewhere in the renovations or fixing it up when he moved into it, a leak had been created, and he got a $30,000 water bill. And he nearly lost his mind. He was expecting a $400 water bill or a $500 water bill, not a $30,000 water bill. So he called up the water service and he said, "Hey, I'm not going to pay this bill." And they said, "That's just fine. We'll send a truck out tomorrow and shut off your water." And he's like, "Well, you can't shut off my water. I need water." And they're like, "Well, we need $30,000. And this tension is what happened in a pure usage model. This is what happens with lots of customers and lots of vendors. And so vendors are on the hook they've spent the money already. The compute already happened. The customer doesn't want the service or they don't want to pay for the service. And there's a lot of tension between customer and vendor. And so that's not working for anybody, which is why the pure consumption model there are a few companies for whom it works really well. But for the most part, we've actually have moved away from that to the hybrid model, which actually says you're going to pay me so much per month for your water. You're going to pay me $500 a month for your water. And this is how much water you can actually use in that. And then if you have overages, we'll have a usage model on top of that over a set amount. And that set amount is going to work for both of us because in order to make either a usage model, but not many people did this, or a hybrid model to work, you actually have to have a tremendous amount of clarity. I need to be able to get an alert from the water service every day that says, "Hey, did you know you're using twice as much as you would normally use?" So I can actually say, "Yeah, I understand that. I don't know what I'm doing, but I'm doing something that makes sense to me to do that much." So you need that to happen for a hybrid model, which smooths out the billing, which goes back to what we had already learned in Azure when we launched it. You need that to happen, but you also need this really customer-centric, customer-friendly, real-time almost data, like data from yesterday about how much you're using. Because the other thing that happens is folks bill too late. And there's an abstraction of value. So I'm in the IT department. We've decided that we're actually going to consolidate databases. We're going to clean them up, and we're going to run some service that's going to take all this compute, but it's only going to last for 60 days. And so we all think that's a good decision, and we might even get that approved at the C-suite, and we actually go ahead and do it. Later, when the bill comes, this enormous $30,000 water bill, no one can associate that bill with that project. It happened too long ago. It's not the same people. Some loud voice, some outside voices might be used as people try to explain to each other what happened, right? And so you need to shorten that cycle. If you're going to be in a model like this, you need to shorten that cycle so that customers are getting alerts, they can see in real time, and so that the value can be connected with what they're doing. So the folks who are running that project have the ability to see, "Hey, I'm spending $60,000. So
it seems like transparency as a theme is in the back of all of these waves that we've looked at.
Yes, there's a constant search. That's a great point. There's a constant search for clarity by both sides, actually, so that I want to make sure that you as my client understand the value that I'm delivering to you, because if you understand that, then you're going to be more willing to pay me and you're going to be happier about keeping me long term. And you want to, similarly, you might understand the value that's being delivered, but you want to understand the cost that's being delivered. I don't want to pay for 80 employees that touch the service once a year. I only want to pay for those who touch it every day or every week or every payroll cycle or whatever. And so that only comes by this clarity and mutual trust.
This fifth wave we're speaking of now, hybrid, which I think a lot of technology companies are finding themselves in. Correct me if I'm wrong, but I think to a certain degree, it's better for both sides, right? Because I, as a CFO, know that I've committed to X amount. I know it can go higher. And then as a vendor, you're looking at it like I have enough predictability in my operating model to know how to staff the business. But then I can't have my cake and eat it too, to a certain extent, that there's this icing on top of the cake. Not the reoccurring, but the recurring portion that I can also layer on for additional revenue.
That's exactly right. Works really well for me. And really the upside, the vendors that we work with who have a hybrid model, they're not actually trying to capture value with the overage, if you call it, which is above the set tier that they're only trying to recover cost. So that really exists for adverse selection when they have a heavy use customer come in, and on a flat model, they lose a lot of money on these customers. And on a spike model, which is what we call a flex model, on a spike model, if you spike, I'm going to at least get my costs covered.
Exactly. Yeah. What are some tips that you give at Blue Rocket to your clients when it comes to the billing and when it comes to dealing with overages?
So just as we've said, there's no such thing as too much clarity. It's really great to be able to give enough detail when you actually do the billing to associate it with activities. So a bill that says $400 and no idea what that was for is not as great as so much for storage and so much for this other thing, so that the accounting department and the users can actually collectively have a good conversation around that. We also want to make sure that you're counting in a way that makes sense to the customer. So we have a client, an industrial software client, who invented a term, and it was they did warehouse software, and they had a term that was the number. It was called the price warehouse location, something like that. So they charged by the item, by however many warehouses it was in, and by its exact location. And I've mangled that explanation, and I'm a pricing expert, and I've talked to them about it a dozen times. So imagine about what their salespeople were trying to explain to the customer. And so the sales cycles were elongated. Nobody could understand it. The billing was mangled at the end. And ultimately, we said, you just need to count something that people can understand.
And Jason, is that a value metric? Is that what you're encouraging people to get to?
Yeah, absolutely. A value metric, right? So, but a value metric that as a way that the customer thinks about it, the way that somebody who warehouses things, the way that they actually think about it is, how many pieces do I have, right?
Yes.
So you probably know this better than I do. You actually are in this business, right? In one way or another.
Yeah.
So you have to make sure that you're counting what they count. Oracle did a licensing project in, I want to say about 2008 or 2009. It's one of the smartest things I'd ever seen. They were trying to sell a big expensive stack of software to a city in the Netherlands. And the city in the Netherlands said, we're never going to buy this. It's just too expensive. And so they said, what if we charge you so much per citizen per year?
Is it the same price though?
Because yes, well, it ultimately came out to the same price. But the municipality thought about everything in terms of citizens, right? That's their tax base, that's their service base, that's how many hospitals they have, it's how many school children they have, it's all. And so for them, you were suddenly counting the way they were counting. Microsoft did a deal at one point where they had a manufacturer of a certain item, a very large ticket item, and they just said, here's the software you can have, and we'll charge by the item you produce. So whenever one of those is finished, then you actually charge you that much more. Ultimately, the client in that case decided they didn't want to think that way. They thought a different way. But for a moment, it was actually it was great to actually align, what does my customer need and what do I need and how do I think about that the same way?
Man, that might be the greatest takeaway from this episode, that you have to speak the way your customer speaks about it, or you have to count the way your customer counts in their daily nomenclature, because we went through the changes of metrics in each of these waves, right? Went from boxes to PCs to users to usage. But within usage, in order to actually make that a smart way to do business, you have to play it back to them in terms they understand and value.
Right. Yeah. So that's actually what works the best for everybody, is at least we're talking about the same thing. vendors don't always, software vendors, SaaS providers don't always like that because it doesn't optimize their model. But the way, I think that's wrong thinking. I think right thinking is, what is the thing that lowers the barrier to purchase as much as possible and allows the customer to more clearly see the value I'm delivering? I can charge more if you understand the value than if I have an obscure metric that works for me that you don't understand.
So Jason, maybe gearing towards a close, we've taken the listeners through 5 different waves here. What's next? Take out your crystal ball here. Put you on the spot.
I think we're actually, for computing at least, I think we're actually kind of there with hybrid. I think this wave is going to last quite a while. The thing that's going to be the hardest to figure out is, how do you price AI? So what is the metric around AI? Is it so counting the way the customer counts? What am I counting? Am I counting the queries? Am I counting the number of employees that I used to have that I don't have now because AI has made my other employees so efficient? Am I counting the megabytes that go through the system so that when folks are sitting at their desktop and they are saying, plan me a vacation to Switzerland, right? Somehow I pay for that, even though I don't know that's what I'm paying for, because we actually have a metric that is mangled. The metric is all about, gigabytes or queries instead of something else. So for most models, I think we are where we are. The trick is going to be figuring out, how do I fairly price AI that covers my costs, because AI is wildly expensive to run, and that also actually provides value for the customer. And a whole bunch of vendors are going to get that wrong, and we're going to learn from them. Just like the ASPs got the business model wrong, but everyone who's in SaaS actually is still benefiting from the lessons that they taught us.
And it's funny because in each of these waves, there is a kernel of truth in each one. I think we have gotten better over time. And like you said, the delivery, the payment, and the metric may change, but you're kind of taking bits and pieces from each of these to try to make it better.
You're carrying the best of forward into the next wave every time.
And you had flagged it at the very beginning. It's also fascinating that there are successful companies in each of these waves. And if it worked for them, they stayed there.
They stayed there. Right. But it's just the center of gravity. Are most people buying that way, or are only a few people buying that way? And so as you leave a wave, those left behind are those for whom it is optimal.
Love it. Well, the center of gravity is definitely changing with AI and the like, and hybrid pricing. If listeners want more, Jason Kap, want more pricing expertise, where can they find you?
Happy to chat with anybody. I'm Jason at bluerocket.io.
Awesome. Thank you for coming on. This has been one of my favorite episodes to do so far.
Thanks, CJ.
Run the Numbers is a mostly LLC production. Yelling an intro by Fat Joe. Artwork by some AI thingamajig. Podcast and video editing is done by Cleancast at cleancast.io. Nothing said on this podcast is intended to be business or investment advice. It's the sole opinion of me, a guy who feeds his dog too much ice cream and has a history of net operating losses, LOL. If you like this podcast, please hit subscribe. It would mean a lot to me. And also check out mostlymetrics.com. That's my newsletter where I explore business models and financial metrics. Thanks for riding with me. Share this with your friends. Peace.